record. Easy. Control from not have some people entering the meeting room. Take memory. Take there we go. Okay, so Maria, do you want to, I'm going to stop sharing and we can put your screen up and then we'll do our introductions. So let's see. Make host.
Should I share my screen now? No?
Yes. So why don't you try doing it?
Host disabled participant to screen sharing.
Okay, so I'm going to make you host. Okay.
Now, let's see. There we have it.
Yeah, works fine.
Good. Alrighty, so good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Rachel Christone. I'm the Director of Education here at the Salem Witch Museum.
And I'm Jill Christensen. I'm the Assistant Education Director.
And we are so excited for today's presentation. Thank you again for all coming. And thank you so much to both Hans and Maria for helping us facilitate this. So we are, of course, recording this presentation. So if you want to watch it again, or if you know someone who wasn't able to join us today to watch it, we will have it posted on our YouTube page. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions as we go, just hold on to them and we'll give you a signal at the end and then we'll read them aloud from the chat. We are so excited to be doing this virtual event with our friends from the Witch Museum in Sweden. So a few weeks ago, we presented a lecture about the Salem Witch Trials for their Swedish audience. And we're very excited to host this reciprocal lecture given by Maria Nordlund. Maria is an archaeologist and a museum professional, and she is also the foremost expert on the witch trials that took place in the village of Torsaker, which I feel like our pronunciation changes every time. And we're very much looking forward to hearing your presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the torch over to you, and Maria, you can take it away.
Oh, thank you. And thank you very much for the invitation. Well, we'll start somewhere, and I have to apologize for my Swinglish, even in the beginning, but I'll do my very best. So we're going to talk about the witch trials in Torsåker. Torsåker.
We were close.
And I will start with some background history and working on from that. So let's start. So during the medieval time in Sweden, we were Catholics, but even then we had the common picture of a witch, and that's a very old one. In the old Swedish provincial laws, it was written, "I saw that you rode on a stick with your hair out and in the form of a troll when it was in the middle of the night and day." It's old Swedish Google translated, so it's a bit weird. But that text, it's not about witchcraft. You can find that text from the law about slander and insults, because calling a woman a witch was the biggest insult ever and could lead to very large fines. So it was very but it was something you shouldn't do, to call anyone a witch. So people were careful about it. But even though there were laws about witchcraft, but not so many trials. Witchcraft that killed humans or animals or destroyed property, that could lead to a civil trial and also could lead to death penalty, because evil witchcraft was supposed to originate from the devil. But to start such a trial, you have to have concrete evidence and at least 6 adult witnesses. And to carry out a death penalty, you also needed the accused to confess. So that was the only way. So it was a big thing to start a witch trial during the medieval age in Sweden. And the smaller allegations about magic and use of magic were handled directly by the church. So mostly the people had to go to the church and the priest talked them into what's right and wrong, and they had to pardon and maybe sometimes have penance or fines or something. So actually it wasn't not that big a deal during the medieval time. But at the end, at the 15th century, there were some small witch trials, but mostly men, and mostly about men who worshipped the old Norse gods like Odin and so on, and through that use witchcraft. So it wasn't like we used to talk about witchcraft. And during such a trial, they could also use the ordeal by water. I don't know if they use that in America, I don't know. But they try to test, and by putting the woman in water, if she floats, then she's guilty. She has the devil's help to survive. But if she sinks and drowns, she's not guilty, but even though dead, so it was quite a hard ordeal. And during the medieval time, what you could call everyday magic was very common. You used it almost every day, as long as it was for good deeds, for example, for healing and so on. There were no problem with that. Everybody did it. Some more, some less. And the spells that they use were often more like prayers for Saint Mary and Jesus and so on. And almost every one of them ended with the words, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And a good Catholic, especially a good Catholic woman, were supposed to put spells like that to protect her home, families, and make life easier. So, and I think the Catholic time also, they were more open for wonders and mysteries than later on. It was something that was, well, it was something in our world at that time. And in Sweden, it was very important about the livestock, especially cows, because they brought the milk. And from milk, you got the cream, and from the cream, you got the butter. And the butter was very expensive, and you can use it like money. You can pay your taxes with butter. So it was a big thing. And making butter was the women's work. So therefore, it was mostly women who used it. But during the 16th century, Sweden became a Protestant country. And on the picture here, we have our big king, Gustav Vasa. And it's because of him we celebrate National Day tomorrow, 6th of June. It was the first king that were king all over Sweden. And by making Sweden Protestant, he also stood above the church. Before, during the Catholic time, it was the Pope in Rome who was, so it was hard for the king to say something against the church. But Gustav Vasa, he's put himself over the church. And he also translated the Bible into Swedish. Before, everything was in Latin, and in the churches, the priests talked in Latin, so the people couldn't understand anything. So now they can read and they can hear what the priest is talking about, and also learn more about the texts in the Bible. But on the other hand, prayers to Catholic saints were banned, and slowly the old good spells were considered prayers to the devil. And at the beginning of the 17th century, usually we used to call it an Orthodox Protestant era here in Sweden. A lot of new books came out in Swedish. there was a lot of new priests who left the universities and went on all over the country to work. And there were lots of discussions about what's the difference between Catholicism and Protestant. So, and a lot of thoughts, a lot of things were handling about the devil, how we should supposed to believe and handle the devil. So the devil was something that was very real for everybody in Sweden during that time. It also changed with one king and one country. So the old provincial laws and also the church laws were replaced by one statute book, one law for everything, and also one court for everything. So things that before could be handled either by the church or by the civil court should now be handled only by the civil court. And to manage that, they have to put in laws. And the church laws wasn't printed. So they actually took parts from the Bible, from the Mosaic laws. And that's why they included the old law about witches from Exodus 22. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. And suddenly, by that, everything changes, because if anyone was accused of being a witch, then they have to take it seriously, because it was a crime that could lead to death penalty. So that was the start of everything. And that was in the beginning of the 17th century. And the priests, they become a part of the civil court, and they were the experts about crimes against God. So here in Sweden, the priests have a very big part in the trials. I don't know if it's the same in Salem. I think it's a little bit different there, but they have a lot of things to say. And the priest also used the Maleum Maleficarum, the old book, a Catholic book from the beginning. And that was a handbook written by two monks about how to find out who is a witch and how to see the signs for it, and also how to interrogate and take care of witches. And this copy, the picture, is from I think it's from the last version, who was printed in 1669, I think. So it was a very popular book, almost as popular as the Bible. And well, a handbook for chasing witches. Great, no problem, just carry on. And during the 17th century, Sweden also grew through many successful wars. So we had the whole of Finland, some parts of Russia, we have Balticum, and even some parts of Denmark also. So it was a very big country, and there were wars almost all the time. But that made it also very hard for the common people, because a lot of men were lost as soldiers, and home in the villages, there were merely women left, women and children. And the wars also made the taxes increase, and upon that, there were very hard winters, so the harvests were very bad. And it was very, very hard time for the people in 1660s and 1670s. And when it's hard and when you're starving, then it's easy to get jealous of the neighbors who have it a little bit better. And then rumors started. They started to wonder, how can they have better than I have? And you can see on the picture also here, we have that little Torsåker. I don't know if you see it up there in Sweden, a little yellow dot. And down here is Stockholm. So there you can see where Torsåker is. Because in that time, people believed that it was possible to take luck. They talked about luck with food, luck with animals, luck. And it was possible to take luck from others to oneself with the help of the devil. But by doing that, you also sold your soul to the evil one. And on the picture here, it's a woman who is making butter, and she's making it with the help of the devil. So suddenly the people began to accuse each other of witchcraft, pacts with the devil, and so on. And the children were along, and they heard all the gossips and slanders, and they started to talk about stories, telling stories about how the witches flew to Blåkulla and also took the children with them. And on Blåkulla, they met the devil, and they had a big feast, and they also had sex with the devil under the table. And the children who told these stories were quite young, down to 4 to 5 years old. And when you're about that age, hopefully you have a lot of imagination. And being a child at that time, you wasn't supposed to be heard or anything, but suddenly people wanted to hear you. So think about a little, maybe 8-year-old boy or girl who the adults telling, oh, please tell us more, tell us more. It was like a stage for them. So the stories from the children was a very, very big part of the trials, especially in Torsåker. And the adults, they also asked leading questions for the children. Did you see that woman, what did they do? And the children just kept on talking. And that led to suddenly husbands could also accuse their own wives. Who wants a wife who has sex with the devil? And children also accuse their own mothers. And it escalated in the years of 1672-73. It started to be rumors everywhere, and it was now time to stop the devil from taking over the world, because they thought it was like a pandemic or something. They had to get rid of it in the beginning, or else everybody would be affected, like the corona. So also the people in church have to take actions. But the rulers of the country, they were busy with all the wars. So they gave the church the task of investigating. And during 8 years in Sweden, nearly 300 people, mostly women, were convicted and executed for witchcraft. And 71 of those came from Torsåker Parish, where almost every 5th woman died. In some families, 3 generations of women were killed at the same time. So it is a very big happening. And that's the largest civilian execution in Sweden's history ever. But not so much in the history books in Sweden. And on the map you can see, this is a map from Torsåker. And Torsåker went along with Dal and Ytterlännäs, 2 other parish. And all the red dots are one people per dot who were accused and executed. So you can see for yourself, it's quite a lot of people. And there were the priests who had the big responsibility to investigate and make record of how many witches there were in the parish. Johannes Vatrangius, he was the vicar in Torsåker, and he has the chaplain Laurentius Honeus, who was the priest in Ytterlännäs. And they took this assignment very seriously, because it was almost like the world was in war with the devil, and they had to stop him and make everything to stop him. And by that, they have to find out every witch in the parish. And here on the map, you can also see Hoola Folkhögskola Häx Museum up here. And it's quite near Torsaker Church. And almost in the middle of the map, you can see Häxberget. That's where the executions took part. And these churches are from the medieval era, Old Catholic Church. The stories that the children told about Blåkulla, those were very important. And usually it wasn't allowed to use children as witnesses in a trial. They had to be adults. But they were the children who had the stories. So they called the children in as witnesses, and the children was allowed to talk. And when one child spoke about one woman, the next day 15 children talked about the same woman. And for some reason they thought that, okay, if 15 children talks about it, then it's true, more true than one. And for the safety of the children, they kept the children in a special house because they were afraid that the witches, the accused witches, should put spells on them. So they put every children in one house. So every evening the children could share their stories. And the next day you have even more children saying the same things about the women. And the children who didn't want to witness, then the priest forced them. It was told that Laurentius Horneus, he was especially hard for the children. The older children, he went down to the river. This was during the winter. And then he put a rope around them. And then he put them in the cold water. And they have to stay there until they were ready to witness. And the small children, he put them in the oven where they used to bake bread and put fire outside the oven. And scared the children to witness, because if they didn't talk, then they could see the fire, and that was a symbol for hell, what was waiting for them if they didn't witness in the court. So they have many children who talked, down to 4 to 5 years of age. And they talked about the women. They also talked about their own mothers, their own sisters, how they came in the night, took the children with them, and went on a broomstick to Blåkulla. Because going to Blåkulla, you have to fly there. So on the broomstick, or you could even fly on a cow, or even on a human. Then they fly away to Blåkulla, and on Blåkulla, that could be, the children said, oh, that was over there by the big tree or something. It was not a special place. It was a invisible place. But on Blåkulla, there were a big party, and there were lots of food. The children could eat as much as they could, comparing to the real life where they almost didn't have any food at all. So they were talking about the dream. They dreamt about food. They dreamt about playing and have no responsibilities, because on Blåkulla you could do whatever you want. So it was for them, I think, very exciting stories to tell, and also like dreams for a hungry stomach. And the priest, they had also they had to make the accused to confess, because that was actually their first assignment. Because if the accused confessed, then they were forgiven of their sins, and then they can receive the Lord's Supper. But a confession wouldn't save your life, only your soul. But the soul was very important for people at that time, because if you were executed without being forgiven, then your soul could never reach the heaven. You had to stay in hell for all eternity. But if you confessed, you got the forgiveness, then you could save your soul. The soul will go up in heaven eventually. So quite a lot of the women actually confessed and said that they were guilty. And that also goes back to the old medieval laws, because you couldn't execute anyone unless they confessed. But some of them didn't confess at all. They stood strong all the time. And in springtime of 1675, actually right about this time now in Sweden, in the first part of June, the last trial were finished. And then it was time to bring justice. And as I said in Sweden, eradicate Satan's weeds from the congregation. That was the assignment they had to do. After the last trial, all the accused women, and there were some men, first had to go to the church in Torsåker, and those who confessed had a last supper. And after that, they had to start a walk up to the mountain, which was in the middle of the 3 parishes. I think it's about 5 to 6 kilometers to walk. And the family members, they walked with them and tried to make them carry on, because everybody was convinced this was the only way to solve everything. And on the picture, you can see the trail up to the execution site on that mountain. So on that day, 71 people were killed. And they were first beheaded. That was the civil execution, you could say, because they were sentenced to death. So they were beheaded. But after that, their bodies were burned at the stake. And that was the so-called punishment from the church, because if you burn the body, you wouldn't be able to be buried on the cemetery. And if you wasn't buried on the cemetery, then you couldn't be a part of the new era when the world is coming back and Jesus coming back to the earth. So you couldn't be a part of the new era. So that was the second so-called execution. 71 people at the same time. Talks about that they had to chop their heads off just a little down from the mountains, because they were afraid that all the blood would make the wood wet, so the stakes wouldn't burn. And there were the families who had to bring the bodies on the stakes. And everybody thought it was the only way to solve it. And everybody stood around and had to be there. But then the devil was defeated. The war was over. But I don't think it was so much celebration that day, because when they went down from the mountain, there were single husbands with small children going back home to an empty cottage where there were no wife, no mother-in-law, and maybe also the oldest daughters were gone. I think it was quite silent. And that big event in Torsåker led to some skepticism among the more educated in Sweden. And that was the start of actually question the witch trials all over Sweden. And that ended up with that the child witnesses were banned, and without children telling their stories, there were no evidence during the trials. They also started to talk about superstition, that people didn't know better. It was the mind of the people who made all this up. And the superstition should not longer be the reason to execute people. And he also talked about the priests. The priests should rather save people and talk them into the right beliefs than condemn them. But even though it ended in Stockholm, 1676, but even though they still believe in the devil, and the last execution for witchcraft took place outside Stockholm, 1704 in Sweden. And the law about death penalty for witchcraft, it went away in, I think, 79, I think they took it away. But the last execution was 1704. And the picture on the side, that's from Codex Gigas. That's a big medieval Bible. I think it's one of the biggest medieval books that we have. I think it's about over 7 kilos. It's a very thick, big Bible. And that's the famous picture of the devil. And you can see that on National Library in Sweden, in Stockholm. So it had to be a great trauma for all the people. And it was quite silent after that. Nobody talked about it. Who could talk about it? Everybody had a part in it. The husbands who accused their own wives and the children, everybody had a part in it. But in the mid part of the 18th century, the grandchild of the both priests in Torsåker and Ytterlännäs, he was also named Horneus. He actually wrote a story. He wrote down what happened in Torsåker. And he also wrote about his grandfather, how hard he was. And he is also the one who explained how it happened on the mountain. But beside that, it was very, very silent about all this. He even forgot which mountain it was where the executions were held. So it had to be a big trauma. So it took 300 years before a public monument was erected on the site in Torsåker. And that's the monument you can see on the picture. There are 2 big stones. And on one of the stones you can read, "Women died, men judged. The faith of the times affects the human." So thank you for listening. I hope you understood my Swinglish.
Well, that's great.
That was amazing. Oh my gosh, we certainly did. So, wow. It's just, what a story. You know, we're so engrossed in ours, but there's so many similarities between Salem and these events, and also so many very stark differences. So we do now have some time for questions. If anybody has any questions, if you would kindly put them in the chat and we will read them aloud. So we'll give everyone a minute to go ahead and put your questions in the chat.
It's very interesting, Maria. We're just talking about our memorial here in Salem, and that too was 300 years when the memorial was finally done. And maybe that's the time it takes to start to
Recognize.
address something terrible.
Exactly.
While we're waiting for questions, we have some thank yous in the chat right now. I'm wondering if when that memorial was created, was there any pushback about doing it, or did people kind of not care either way? Like, what was the community reaction when it was put in place?
I don't really know. Hans-Olof, do you know if it was any?
Yeah, I think I do, because I have an old clip. At least I had one. I think it's at the museum now in 1975 at the local paper. And there was actually a big discussion, should we have a monument or not? And as I recall, reading it for a while ago, the church was very against and the vicar in 1975 was he was not so really keen on sort of remembering these things, as you could imagine. But either way, the monument was erected. But there was a big discussion.
Mm.
And do people visit it? Is it a common place to go, or is it kind of out of the way, so there isn't a lot of visitation?
I think it's a lot of visitation, especially in the summer. You go to the museum and you go to the church and you go to the mountain. And sometimes we have events there also. And I think in 75, 76, they were maybe a bit worried that this would be some kind of a, I don't know, what the event that they thought was going to happen on the mountain. But people go there, they are silent, they remember, and they think about what happened. And in the 80s, I guess they made an they checked the soil, and they did some digging, and the experts could see there were actually big fires somewhere down the time. So it's kind of we're pretty sure that this is the right place.
Mm.
That's interesting too. A similarity that they weren't sure where the hangings took place in Salem.
Mm-hmm.
2017 for sure, but that something so monumental and tragic could be pushed back and not thought about for some time is shocking.
So we have two questions in the chat. Oh, do you have a thought on that, Hans? Before we
No, yes, keep on.
So we have one question. Thank you. Can you tell us about your museum?
Okay. Then I think it's best that Hans talks about the Krigsmuseet in Torsåker.
Yeah, it's actually the municipality who owns the museum, and it's situated at the school, Hula Folk High School, who is very close to the mountain and close to the church. So it's of course in Torsaker. And a few years ago, we kind of moved the museum there because we thought it would be better being close to all the other things you could remember these events by. It's a very small museum, extremely small, as you've seen on when we showed you it by Zoom. But we sort of cramped everything we can into a very small space, and every day we talk about making it larger. So it'll probably be somewhere down the line when we get some money. And it's open all year round, especially in the summer. It's popular to go there and to see the sights, go to the mountain, go to the church. Yeah, a tourist.
And someday Jill and I are coming.
Yeah.
So we have another question. Did anyone escape or run away?
Yes, it actually was a woman who escaped from Torsåker. Because the trials they held the trials during October for a whole month, and the people weren't in jail or something. They came to the trial every day, and one woman managed to escape, and her son was also accused, and he was already away as a sailor on a ship. And we don't know where she went, but she escaped. But one woman.
Wow.
So we have another question. I've heard in the Norwegian witch trials that a third of the victims were Sami. Was that a factor at this one?
During that time, the Sami people weren't stationed in this region, but instead there were people from Finland who lived in Torsåker. In the end of the 16th century, a lot of people came from Finland, and they lived a little bit different than the farmers in Torsåker, because they went into the forest and they took down the forest, and then they burned it, everything, and then they farmed in the ashes. So they get very rich harvests, but then they have to move on to the next and to the next. And there are very big forests around Torsåker, so there were no problem. They could stay in the forest. They also call them forest Finnish people. But they were a little bit different. They talk different and they have a different tradition. So the people from Finland, they were the others. But during the witch trials, they had been there in the area for 100 years, and they started to be a part of the society. And a lot of the people who were accused had connections to the people from Finland. So it's also a question about the others, we and them. But it was more up in the northern part of Sweden, where they had same situation with the Sami people.
Fascinating. It's very interesting, the idea of the others and how that plays into witch trials.
And here also, in addition to that, a certain type of woman especially would be a target, like aggressive or argumentative or forceful. Do you know if that was a similar story there?
This accusation could actually strike any woman, but if you were, first of all, if you were famous for healing and so on, with more knowledge than others, but also if you were stubborn or proud of yourself, or maybe just took too much place. One woman in the parish, she is my favorite woman. I think she had a very special kind of humor. So she was, well, she talked back to men, and she made fun of them and so on. And she was accused for casting spells on the men. Maybe she was strong and maybe beautiful, and the men were terrified for her because she didn't need them. She made fun of them, and she had her own life, but she was sentenced to death. So absolutely. And one of the old women, the oldest woman who were sentenced to death, she was actually from Finland, originated from Finland, and it says she was about over 8 years old. She actually, when they accused her in the trial, she drew a knife in the court, and that was something you shouldn't do. Every Swedish people should know that you never put weapon in the court. You leave them outside. But she, her very old woman, put up her knife, and so yes. It was hard for women with strong will.
And we should also say that even Mr. The Reverend Horneus' own wife was accused outside the church, and she kind of slapped the boy and said, "You must have seen wrong." So he kind of changes his testimony. And Horneus' own mother was accused to be a witch, and I think she was executed.
Yes, she was executed in Härnösand. At the same time as the trials were in Torsåker, the Laurentius Horneus' own mother and her sister were executed in Härnösand for witchcraft.
We have a question. What was the name of the older woman you were just speaking of?
She's named Fors Edsfinskan in Swedish. She's I think she's number 60 on the list of executed people.
And what was her age approximately? Do you know?
Over 80.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So while we're waiting for maybe 1 or 2 last questions, do you want to ask about Easter?
Of course, the question that fascinates me is here in America, the witch is connected to Halloween, but we've discovered that in Sweden, there's a connection to Easter. And so I'm
Mhm.
wondering if you can talk about that a little bit.
Well, as I said, it was very quiet about the trials, but in the folklore, they started a tradition, mostly in the southern part of Sweden, that during Easter time, people used to put notes on the back of each other, and notes who said witch, as a prank. And that was usually during Easter time, because those days when Jesus Christ is dead and has left the earth, then there's open ground for all evil spirits. And that tradition somehow went on, and it could also end up in bigger and bigger pranks. So they had to stop it in some way. And they also, usually they had the young people used to have big parties and a lot of alcohol and so on, like young people could have. So they tried to stop it. And during the 20th century, it somehow changes to another tradition. And the tradition changes to that the small children, they dress up as witches and goes around during Easter and knocks on doors and asks for candies. And it's not trick or treat. They leave postcards with Easter greetings, and then they get candies back. So it's very, it's very nice, at least. And but nowadays, more and more people think it's a bad tradition, because how can we let our children go out as witches when we know what traumatic happenings it was? But when I was a small girl, I was also out with my broom and dressed as a witch. But the Swedish witch don't have that top hat. We have more like that. And
Like
we
a
have a
kerchief,
broom. And we have a broom and coffee kettle also, where we can put the candies in.
Oh, that's great.
So interesting.
But
So
nowadays
there were no traditions of Halloween here in Sweden until 20 years ago. It was our Easter tradition with our Easter witch.
Nowadays it's kind of mixed up with Halloween and maybe Easter is falling back a bit.
Yes.
Interesting.
I didn't have any Easter witches knocking on my door this year.
No, neither did
Not
I.
a single one.
That is so interesting.
Boy.
But some aliens and some zombies in Halloween.
That's good.
All right. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we want to say again, thank you so much.
Maria, that was great.
That was an
Oh,
excellent
thank you.
presentation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this has been so fascinating to talk about the history of witch trials in both places, as well as the way we have interpreted the history in the 20th and 21st centuries, hearing about your memorial and getting to see your museum and you seeing ours. It's just been so interesting. And I'm sure we'll find other things to do together in the future.
Definitely.
Yes, hopefully.
So thank you everybody for coming. Again, this this has been recorded and will be posted on our YouTube if you'd like to share it. And we hope everybody has a great rest of their Sunday afternoon.
The same to you. Thank you very much.